All right, thank you very much for joining us on the webinar. My name is Mike DePalma. I am the Channel Development Manager at Datto. So we are a business continuity provider based out of Norwalk, Connecticut. So we're about 40 miles east of Manhattan. Very briefly about Datto, pretty cool entrepreneurial story here. Our founder started the company when he was 22. Started building these devices by hand, selling them online. Fast forward to 2015, 8 years later, and the Wall Street Journal gave us a $1 billion valuation. So pretty cool basement to $1 billion story. We're up over 1,800 employees worldwide, and we protect over 560 petabytes of data in our 9 data centers around the world. We have 2 here in the States, one in Allentown, Pennsylvania, one out in Salt Lake City. I'll get to the importance of having different locations like that in a little bit. But we're not talking about that. We're going to talk about some of the threats that are out there. Specifically ransomware. So I've been giving ransomware specific presentations for the last 5 years or so. And 5 years ago, you get a couple head nods, folks looking down at their phones. But as the years have gone on, we've seen more and more head nods. We've seen people paying more attention because either they've been hit with ransomware, or they have a vendor or a competitor even, or they're just reading stories about other businesses getting hit by ransomware. And it really has become an epidemic. Last year alone, about $1 billion changed hands between the business community and these criminals via Bitcoin payments. So we're seeing a huge spike, but the actual impact to these attacks is closer to $75 billion. So what makes up that delta there? Well, this number includes the cost of downtime and data loss, and includes the cost of some of the businesses that are never able to recover and actually have to close their doors. So when we look at the leverage that these criminals have, it's really twofold. What they're doing is they're not stealing your data for the most part, they're just encrypting it. And what this allows them to do is cast a very large net. Now they don't care if your data is actually valuable. They just know that regardless of your industry, of your size of your business, they know that you can't operate without your data, and you're going to pay to get it back. And small businesses are more susceptible because they normally can't absorb a week of downtime. PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a study a couple of years back that said that a small business that was down for a week or more had a 71% chance of closing its doors within 12 months. FEMA put out a number earlier this year talking about natural disasters, but they said a business that went down had a 60% chance of never reopening their doors. So these are some scary numbers that the criminals know. So we could acronym you to death on one of these webinars, but there's 2 that are very critical because these are 2 that the criminals are very well aware of and they know give them leverage. And the first one is the left-hand side of the screen. This is the easy one. RPO is your recovery point objective. Very simply, how much data are you at risk of losing at any given time? So how often are you taking your backups? If you're taking them daily, you're saying, okay, I'm okay with losing a day's worth of data. And again, some companies are fine with that. Sometimes it needs to be more aggressive, hourly, or even more aggressively, 15 minutes or so. The idea here is you should be able to answer this question at a minimum. How much data am I at risk of losing? Most people feel relatively comfortable. I do a lot of end user presentations. I kind of travel North America doing panels and things like that on behalf of Datto, on behalf of some of our partners like Aileron. And I get a sense of really what the business community is doing. And most folks feel pretty comfortable about that. Now, the caveat to that is if you're not testing your backups, then you really can't answer that question, right? That star might have the goal of being hourly. Then you go in and recover and you find out that your backup's been failing for 3 weeks. Now all of a sudden that star jumps from 1 hour to 3 weeks. But for the most part, that's all right. So that's the first piece of leverage, right? They've got your data. If you've got no backup, well then you definitely have no other recourse but to pay to get your data back, right? But they know, the criminals know that most of the business community is backing up their data. So that's not the reason why so many people are paying. The reason why people are paying is that right-hand side of the screen, that star underneath RTO, which is your recovery time objective. Okay, you're backing up your data. How much time would it take you to pull that data back, put it onto a new machine, and get you back up into a production environment? Most folks can't answer that. Would that be 2 days, 2 weeks, longer? Most people have never done a test like this, so they don't know. So the criminals will put you in a position to say, okay, pay me $5,000 in Bitcoin, or go through door number 2, which is go ahead and restore your data and call me back in a week. Now the cost of that downtime is going to far exceed the $5,000 that they're asking for the most part, and that's why people pay. And we've done a lot of studies to figure out, what that cost of downtime is, and it could be obviously different for every single company, and again, your industry and your size and the kind of volume you do every day. So we try to put a number on that, and that's difficult. You really need a second set of eyes to come in there and try to address that problem, but it is critical that you can answer both of those questions. Now, I tell the story of the city of Atlanta mostly because the numbers are public. We know now the numbers. It's not a guessing game. City of Atlanta was hit with a ransomware attack about a year and a half ago, and they were asked for $52,000. Okay, not a number that's going to break the bank for the city of Atlanta when you think about their size and their budget, but government says not to pay, so they weren't going to pay that ransom. They say, okay, with the city of Atlanta, we've got backup, right? So they went and tried to restore. Now, all their systems were down, including their criminal database, right? So these are super critical systems that needed to get back up online. Within 3 weeks of this attack, an article came out that was confirmed by the city that they had already spent about $2.7 million remediating that issue. $2.7 million. Could have paid the $52,000. Within 3 weeks, they paid $2.7 million. They then had to go back to the city about 6 months later and say, okay, we actually spent another $9.5 million. So now their total investment on remediating this problem was $12 million. When you want to figure out what makes up that $75 billion numbers, here it is right on the screen, right? They could have paid the ransom. They didn't. It cost them $12.2 million. And these are large numbers, hard to kind of scale. But I can tell you that their annual IT budget for the entire city is about $35 million. So a third of that went towards remediating this problem. This is the impact. The city of Atlanta can absorb that, right? The city of Atlanta is not going to go out of business. They're going to rebond some things, raise the mill rate, whatever they're going to do, right? A small business cannot normally float this kind of money. And when we do our own internal ransomware report where we talk to the managed services community, the outsourced IT community, as well as the small business community, and we see, again, that every single industry is vulnerable. Right, so you could, there's kind of two paths you could take if you're a criminal. You could be the home run hitter and go for Fortune 500 companies or hospitals or, again, municipalities and try to get the big, large payout. Or you could be the singles hitter, saying I could attack 1,000 small businesses every week, just blasting out emails, knowing that a certain percentage will definitely click on a malicious email, infect their network, knowing that a lot of small businesses don't have the right protections in place and don't have a way to really recover quickly. So they're going to have a much higher success rate. Now, the cost to the small business community is massive as well. In this report, we found that the average payment from a small business, the average ask, is only $4,300. But the average impact in our report, and we went from June 2018 through June 2019, was about $43,000, so 10 times higher than the actual payment. Forbes put out an article just a few weeks back, and they said that the average cost to recover was $84,000. For the year of 2019. That had doubled. So it actually kind of lined up with our numbers, right? Last year they said it was around 41,000. It really lined up with what we were doing, but it has doubled because of the impact and the amount of businesses that never recover and then, the trickle effects that happen. So this is real. And so what's the government doing about it? I actually am lucky enough to sit on a lot of panels and do a lot of presentations alongside folks from the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Secret Service, I'll kind of tell some really scary stories that I tend to steal in my presentations because they're really good and they're coming straight from the government's lips. But ultimately, everybody always asks, okay, what's the government doing about it? You know it's a big threat, so what are you guys doing about it? Well, it's really three phases. First, they're going to investigate. Now, the investigations don't tend to lead to a lot of cases where they're catching the folks, right? They're asking for the money in Bitcoin, remember, which is an anonymous cryptocurrency. So they're not asking for credit card numbers, which can be traced or, can be reversed. Same thing with ACH payments, higher risk of getting caught. With Bitcoin, once that money goes out, it's almost impossible for these guys to go in and try to find them. So they investigate, looking for vulnerabilities. And with that information, they go to step two, which is to educate. That's why you will see a lot of these folks out into the field, doing these presentations, which is great. But ultimately, what does the government do best? They regulate, right? They regulate. They want to go back to their constituents and say, hey, look, we know this is an epidemic. We addressed it. And so you see regulations such as GDPR out in Europe, which is essentially kind of migrating over to the states. Here in the states, it's on a state-by-state or industry-by-industry basis, but we've seen California pass essentially GDP 2.0, almost the same language. You see some similar regulations up in the Northeast, but eventually we're going to see this as the standard, that GDPR, really stringent standard. Now, what do these regulations ultimately do? They're not preventing these guys from getting in or even catching these guys. What they're doing is now shifting the burden over to the small business community and saying you are responsible for protecting your data, your client's data, your employee data. And if you do get attacked, which can cost you, again, $84,000, you do get recovered, we're going to come knocking on your door and say, show me your plan. Show me all the due diligence that you did to protect us. And if not, you're liable for some payouts there, right? So that's what they're doing, which has now kind of scared the business community into saying, hey, how do I keep up to date? When they pass one of these regulations, the ramp up time is usually pretty quick. When New Jersey passed their law about a year and a half ago, it was a 12-month window before you had to be compliant. And so it's good to start figuring out, even if wherever you're located doesn't have those stringent compliancy laws, you better be ahead of the game because it is coming. And so ultimately, right, we've all agreed now that the real leverage and the real cost and the real reason that businesses can't recover is that downtime. So the good news is we have seen an evolution in the way backups are being taken. And a lot of folks are still using the same style backup as they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago even. And think about the rest of your technology. Everything else has evolved, but a lot of folks are still staying in the old traditional kind of commoditized style of backup. Criminals love that. Within that ransomware report, we found that the managed services community, over 90%, really saw the ransomware epidemic as being something that needs to be addressed immediately. Only 26% of the small business community agreed. Great number for the criminals, right? Because the small business community is lagging behind the technology that's out there. So really what's happened is you've seen backup evolve into business continuity. The idea that we're going to be able to keep your business up and running before those restorations even start. So what does that look like? Well, first and foremost, you want to have multiple copies of your data, different geographical location, because downtime doesn't necessarily always happen just because of a criminal attack. It could be a fire, a flood, some sort of disaster that comes through your area. It could be just a server failure, right? No hardware is going to last forever. So you want to have multiple copies of your data. The on-premise stuff is great. We see a lot of businesses just have on-premise, but you want to have multiple copies. That's why we've chose those locations. To be honest, the real reason why they are where they are is because they're on opposite sides of the country. So now, regardless of what's happening in wherever you are located, you know you've got a safe copy of your data. So you've got the on-premise and then the automatic replication to those data centers. Now, you want to make it automated as well. 91% of data loss and downtime occurs because of user error. Not normally somebody internal doing something maliciously. It's people not being educated and not knowing the sites they should be going to, the things they should be clicking on, and all the rest, right? And so you want to make sure that all of that's automated. That's where it starts with that RPO question. You need to have a conversation and say, okay, what do we need our RPO goal to be? This is a screenshot of my particular backup. I back it up hourly during business hours. That's fine. Right? That's fine. It's regressive enough for me. But not only do you want to make that automated, you want to make the testing automated as well, both for the local backups and for that offsite sync. You want to make sure you're seeing hopefully all these pretty green dots, meaning that it worked. But maybe you do see an X, that scary red X that says, hey, this backup is having some issues. Well, now you can proactively go in there and figure out what's going on so that you're not waiting until disaster strikes to find out, oh man, all my backups are encrypted or infected or whatever happens, right? So all those backups are being tested. But the way the backups are being done is differently as well. Traditional backup usually does its job. They back up the files and the folders that it needs to. But if you do have a disaster, now you've got to go get a new piece of hardware, install all the applications, the operating systems. What an image-based backup does is it takes a full snapshot of that entire server. So it's capturing those operating systems, those applications, everything that lives on that on-premise server now is replicated to the on-premise device and then subsequently set off. So you don't run the risk of missing any volumes, right? But beyond that, what that allows us to do is, okay, we've taken this base image, that first snapshot. Now you set up that schedule that we just saw a couple screens ago, and it's all we're doing in those hourly backups is taking incremental block level changes. So we're only backing up the changes that occur. And what that allows us to do is it's what's called inverse chain technology, which means that as opposed to traditional backups that tend to be layered upon previous backups, what this allows you to do is every single backup point is independent of one another. So if you get hit with a ransomware attack at 11 o'clock, you know there's no risk of that 10 o'clock backup being impacted. Take that little time machine back, and you know that data will all be there with no risk of it being encrypted via a ransomware virus. But ultimately what this allows us to do, because we're capturing everything through that image-based system, is allows us to virtualize that on-premise device or from either one of those data centers. So what does that look like? Well, somebody in your office gets that scary red screen. It's now migrated to your server. Your server's encrypted. Since everything that lived on that server now lives on this on-premise device, you would call up Isaac and his team, and he would spin up a virtual machine, meaning that now this on-premise device would be operating as your server. So everybody in the office that was working off of that server that's been encrypted is now working off of this data, and it's a true production environment. Because remember, all your applications are on there. You can make active backups when you're in this state. And you could be in this state for several hours, several days, several weeks even, and it's truly business as usual. A lot of the folks within your office won't even know this occurred. So before you even start saying, okay, let's start restoring this data, first things first, let's get you back up and running. Now you've eliminated that downtime or reduced that downtime to an acceptable amount. And when you're ready to bring that data over, we could bring everything over, including all the changes that were made. So you're not getting back to business where from where that attack occurred, but instead where you were when you wanted to start that restoration. And you could actually start copying that image during this virtualized state. So the benefits of this are pretty clear, right? You're going to reduce that downtime. Now you're talking about minutes or hours as opposed to days or weeks. You're able to do that and allow yourself to answer those questions. At a minimum, you'll be able to say, I know my RTO because I set up my schedule. We're testing those backups, but I mean my RPO, but you also know your RTO because you're going to do a test on that virtualization. Actually, those virtualization capabilities are being tested every single night as well. In the background, a virtual machine is spun up automatically, all the way up to a boot screen. Snapshot is taken of that and sent off with the timestamp, so you know all these cool virtualization capabilities are being tested as well. So at a minimum, you're going to be able to answer those questions because you know how quickly your systems can get back up online, and you have the ability to do it locally or from either one of those data centers. So if there is one of those disasters, we're up here in Connecticut, we got hammered by Hurricane Sandy. We had thousands of businesses operating out of our data centers as their server rooms were being drained out and new racks were being put in. How many of those businesses would have been susceptible to that 71% number that PricewaterhouseCoopers came up with, right? So ultimately, what this is trying to do is eliminate both pieces of leverage, take out both of their legs, right? We've got the lost data piece taken care of because you've set up your schedule, it's being tested, but you also take care of that downtime as well, allowing you to keep your business up and running before you even start that restoration. So at a minimum, what I suggest you do is just have Aileron come out and do a network assessment. See what you have, take a look at it, make sure that whatever you have addresses your goals on both the RPO and the RTO side. There's a chance you're completely covered, but there's really no harm in letting somebody come in and say, okay, is this okay? Can you lose this amount of data? Can you be down for this amount of time? And everybody's different. So I suggest you reach out to Isaac. He can go into a little more detail. This was pretty high level, but hopefully this was educational. There will be a recording of it. You could share it with members from your team. With that, I am going to close things out and enjoy the rest of your day.